Okay, thank you very much for inviting me. Glad to be on board and glad that we can do it by Zoom. And we're exploring over the next 3 weeks, last week, this week, and next week, the wisdom literature, primarily, which are the three books of the Old Testament: Job, Proverbs, and Ecclesiastes. And we noted that there's three houses in these three books. You have in Ecclesiastes 12, you have the house that is dilapidated and eroding, which gives us the consciousness. It's all a big metaphor for our bodies are wearing out and growing old. The roof line is sagging and the windows are getting dim. And that's one of the things about life, is that it ends in the futility of dissipation of life itself. In Proverbs chapter 9, you have wisdom inviting us into the banquet. It's a 7-pillared mansion. The food is on a board, the loaded board of the kitchen table. It's groaning from the beautiful, delicious food. And she invites everyone who's naive, fool, simple-minded, a sloth, whatever. There's 4 different personality disorders in the book of Proverbs, and they're all invited for supper and to come in and to lose their simple-mindedness and to enjoy the banquet. Not only temporal blessings, but also eternal blessings, and that's wisdom. It's interesting, in the book of Proverbs, you have 4 references to the tree of life, and you have 4 references to the fountain of life. And that's what wisdom gives: tree of life, and it gives the fountain of life. And you have the imagery of the paradisal garden, where you had a tree and you had a river system that flowed out in 4 directions to circumnavigate the whole wide world. So God's blessings, his blessings are global, they're universal, and it's a tree of life and a fountain of life. And that's the wisdom of Proverbs, the house of wisdom in Proverbs chapter 9. And in Job chapter 2, you have the collapsed house. You have his 10 children, 7 sons, 3 daughters that were killed in a collapsed house with a tornadic event, a tornado, probably an F3 or something along that line. It knocked out the 4 pillars, so it's a rotational wind, and it knocks down the house. And those 3 pictures of the 3 houses really have to be incorporated and integrated together to be truly wise. If you just zero in on one, it's like a stool with 1 leg, or 2, it's a stool with 2 legs. You need all 3. There are anomalies of life, like the collapsed house, the catastrophes, the disasters, the invasion, the kidnapping, murder, all those different things that happen. And they happen to the righteous as well as the unrighteous. And there's an invisible realm, and we only occupy a very tiny part of the visible realm. Ecclesiastes focuses on life under the sun. So the parameters, the field of observation is under the sun, the horizon to horizon. Whereas in Job, you have the invisible realm. And so there's things that go on that are beyond us. And that has to be factored in as well, in the anomalies and the disasters of life. And we're going to look at that next week. But 3 houses, and we need to integrate all 3 together. Before we get to the book of Ecclesiastes, which is the subject for today, just a couple of things, is to zero in on the fact that the Lord, when he was incarnated, embodied wisdom itself. In him are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge, it says in Colossians 2, verse 3. So Jesus was the very embodiment of wisdom, and he was incarnated. And when he was incarnated, Luke actually tells us a little bit about the incarnation. And it's fascinating. And I'll just quote Luke chapter 2, verse 40 and 52. And the child grew and became strong, filled with wisdom. There's our wisdom literature. Filled with wisdom, and the favor of God was with him. Verse 52. And Jesus increased in wisdom. So Proverbs opens up with the promise that the naive, the fools, the slothful, the scoffers and mockers and cynics, pessimists, they can become wise. And then it also talks in Proverbs chapter 1, and they can increase in wisdom. So you receive wisdom and you increase in wisdom. And it says Jesus was filled with wisdom, and he increased in wisdom, in stature, that's physical growth, in favor with God and man, that's ethical, spiritual growth, and social growth. So Jesus was incarnated, and he's the embodiment of wisdom. And one thing about wisdom, it's incremental. It's through incarnation. Jesus is the perfect embodiment of wisdom itself. And yet, when he's incarnated, you have to wait through the slow, incremental, developmental stages of life. Here he is. He's a newborn baby, suckling at his mother's breast. Then he gets weaned, and then he becomes a toddler. He gets toilet trained, and then he moves on. And you have this slow, incremental thing. And often when I've thought of the incarnation being part of this frenetic, fast-paced world in which we live, I want the incarnation to speed up, like get on with it. Grow up, get involved with the teaching and the mission and the death, resurrection, and ascension. But God's ways are not man's ways. It's incarnation with the slow, developmental, incremental production of wisdom in the life. And Jesus is the embodiment of it. And he went through all those stages. He knows what a 1-year-old, 2-year-old, 5-year-old, preteen, teenager, and he knows all those phases of life. And that's the embodiment of wisdom. So when you get to wisdom literature, you'll find, and I'm borrowing language from Derek Kidder, he's a very good writer on this, real expert in that field. He says, in the priest you have the ephod. That's the ephod, that's the priestly garment, a beautiful garment. And you have Leviticus and the songs of worship, which brings you into the temple of God. With the prophetic mantle, you have the garb of thundering truth, calling people back to repentance, back to the God of the covenants, and obedience so needed. But in the wisdom literature, the garb is the work clothes. It's not the ephod of the priest. It's not the prophetic mantle of the prophets, major and minor prophets. It's the work clothes of wisdom, small, incremental. So you find wisdom in the wisdom literature. You find it in the home, in the domestic sphere. You find it in the neighborhood. You find it in the workplace. You find it in the political office. You find it in the marketplace, the noisy marketplace. You find it at the intersections of the busiest parts of life. And wisdom percolates and fills and inundates every single aspect of life. And that's really wisdom in work clothes. Book of Proverbs is not a book on how to be polite. It's not a book on manners. It's much, much more than that. It's wisdom of God, right down to the basic, finest details of life. So nothing is inconsequential. So you're at the workplace and you're looking at the clock tick away. I remember working in the factory, and every minute it clicked and it clicked and it clicked, and I could see the slow passage of time while I was working in a box factory. I thought, what a boring job. And yet wisdom actually percolates right down to the workplace and how you work and how you behave as an employer, an employee, and how you live life and your focus of life. So that's the beautiful thing about the wisdom literature. It's dressed in work clothes. And that's the beautiful thing. But Jesus lived in the orb of the wisdom literature. Not only was he wisdom as its embodiment, for in him were hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge, but you see through his experiences. And I'm going to just highlight his experiences before we look at the book of Ecclesiastes. First thing is that Jesus taught in the orbit of wisdom literature. It says in Matthew chapter 13, and by the way, before I get started, I should say that I've got this all written down in 7 pages of notes, and it's developed. And if anybody wants it, I'll send it gladly to you. Just email me at m for Mark, A for Andrew, Robinson, m.a.robinson@shaw.ca. And I'll glad to send you all these notes. So it'll be available to you. It says that Jesus in Matthew 13, 34, 35, spoke to the crowd in parables. Indeed, he said nothing to them without a parable. This was to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet. And he's quoting Psalm 78 here. I will open my mouth in parables, and I will utter what's been hidden since the foundation of the world. So Jesus' methodology in teaching was parabolic. And parable means to put by the side for sake of comparison. So you put something by the side and you're comparing it. The kingdom of heaven is like, and you make a comparison. The kingdom of heaven is like a field. The kingdom of heaven is like a pearl of great price. The kingdom of heaven is the comparison made. And it's interesting that the Hebrew expression for Proverbs is comparison. That's what Proverbs is. And so when you look at the book of Proverbs, when they get started in chapter 10 all the way to the end, you'll find all these comparisons. It says, here's one that's really bold: a woman without discretion, this is the woman called folly, is like a beautiful woman without discretion is like a gold ring in a pig's snout. That's a comparison. What a bold comparison. But Proverbs means comparison, and parables means to put by the side for comparison. So Jesus was in the orbit of using Proverbs and parables in parabolic language, is in the mode of wisdom literature. That's the first thing. Second thing is, one of the common features of the wisdom literature is the core utterance of Job and Proverbs and Ecclesiastes is fear the Lord. You'll always get that. Job chapter 28, the beginning, it says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Job 28, verse 28, the fear of the Lord is the beginning. It doesn't mean that this is the platform from which you launch into other things. It's actually the foundation stone from which you never leave. So everything is founded on wisdom. The fear of the Lord is the beginning to wisdom, and to depart from evil is understanding. And when you get to Proverbs 1, verse 7 and Proverbs 9, verse 10, it says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, and the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom in those two verses. So we see that's the core, the fear of the Lord. And when you get to the very end of Ecclesiastes chapter 12, it says this: the end of the matter. This is 12, verse 13. The end of the matter, he's summing up the whole book, has all been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments. This is the whole duty of man. And the word duty is actually in italics. It's not in the Hebrew. So the whole essence of humankind is to fear God. And you get that in Proverbs chapter 3. It says, in all your ways acknowledge him. Actually, literally in the Hebrew is, in all the ways, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, literally, know him, and he will establish your pathways. So that's the Hebrew, that's the literal. And so we see that the fear of the Lord is the core, and that is the core of Jesus' life. Listen to Isaiah chapter 11. There shall come forth, 11 verses 1 to 3, there shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse. That's David's father. A branch from his roots shall bear fruit. Speaking of the Messiah, and the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him. The Spirit of wisdom and understanding. The Spirit of counsel and might. There's omnipotence behind his counsel. So what he decrees, he has the power to accomplish. That's the whole idea of might. The Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord, and his delight shall be in the fear of the Lord. This was the very core value of Jesus Christ. This is the one attitude that drove him, is not to seek his own glory, but to seek the glory of his Father. Listen to John chapter 5:44. This is what he's saying. How can you believe, to the leaders of Israel, how can you believe when you receive glory or honor one from another and do not seek the glory that comes from the one and only God? So Jesus' core value was the fear of the Lord. Matthew 10, verses 28. Don't fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather, fear him who can destroy both soul and body in Gehenna. Yes, fear him. And so Jesus' core value was the fear of the Lord. And when you get to the book of wisdom, you'll find the fear of the Lord. I'll give you a few examples. Ecclesiastes 8, verse 13, it will not go well with the wicked, neither will he prolong his days like a shadow which gets extended, because he does not fear before God. Ecclesiastes 5, verse 7, when dreams increase, words grow many. That's vanity, but God is the one you must fear. And so Jesus resonated with that core value. That's what made Jesus the bravest person on earth. He was the wisest person on earth, and he was the bravest person on earth. And he was brave because he feared God only. Caiaphas, Annas, Herod Antipas, the Caesars, the Sanhedrin, he didn't fear anybody because he feared God alone. That's why he could go into the temple and be the only one that would turn over the tables of the money changers, because he feared God. The fear of the Lord was his zeal by which he delighted in every day. And so that's the core value of the wisdom literature, is to fear God. In all your ways, know him, and he shall direct your path. Another thing about the wisdom literature, particularly Ecclesiastes and Jesus' life, is the sense of vanity. Now, all the way through Proverbs or all the way through Ecclesiastes, you're going to get 38 times 38 times in the Septuagint, the Greek version, 39 times in the Masoretic text, the Hebrew version. So 39 times out of 54 times that word is used in Ecclesiastes. 70 to 72% of the uses of the word vanity are found in this small little book of 12 chapters. I mean, you look at the Old Testament, it's pretty thick. And in those 12 little thin chapters, 70 to 72% of the time, vanity, vexation of spirit, striving after wind. And you go, wow, that seems really pessimistic. That sounds like cynicism. That sounds like really depressing literature. I'm going to just avoid Ecclesiastes altogether. So when you read Ecclesiastes, you get the sense that, man, this is tough literature to read. It seems that everything is wasted. And yet it's interesting when the preacher in Ecclesiastes finishes up in chapter 12, he describes his work in this way, and I'll read it to you. He describes the book in this way. This is chapter 12, verses 10 and 11. The preacher sought to find words of delight, and uprightly he wrote words of truth. The words of the wise are like goads, and like nails firmly fixed are the collected sayings given by the one shepherd. There's God as the shepherd. So when you look at Ecclesiastes, although there seems to be this pessimistic note throughout it of vanity and vexation of spirit, and everything you earn will eventually dissipate, because our life is a vapor that appears for a little while and then dissipates. It's like smoke, vapor, mist. That describes our life. It's gone. It's like the eagle coming to its prey, or it's like the weaver's shuttle. It's over so quickly. It's like a breath. Job 7:7, he says, my life is like a breath, one exhalation. You exhale 4 times every 15 seconds, you breathe in and out. So it's just, life is so short, and it seems like it's for naught. And that seems to be the tenor of the book of Ecclesiastes. But that is actually, according to Ecclesiastes, according to Koheleth, that's the name of the preacher, Koheleth, the Hebrew expression. He says, these are words of delight. These are words of truth. And they're like goads that stimulate us to action. And they're like nails that are firmly fixed and you can depend on it. So Ecclesiastes is for delight, to stimulate us to action, to live not for this world, which dissipates, but to live for the next world, which is eternal. That's the whole point. And then they're like nails firmly fixed, and you can put everything on the nail in the market, whether it's in the marketplace or in the bedroom or whatever it is, and it's firmly fixed, and it can hang all of life on it. And so that's actually the summary of the book of Ecclesiastes, is they're delightful words, because people who live for the here and now, for life under the sun, everything will be lost. If it's wood, it will rot. If it's metal, it will rust. If it's plastics, it will biodegrade. And if it's your life, you will die. So it's always good to live in light. And C.S. Lewis once said this, and I thought this was a great quote. I forget exactly which essay it was in, but he said, if you're hungry and you're hungry for food, if your stomach is hungry, it means that food probably exists, because the hunger pains do correlate with the need met by food. If you're thirsty and you're longing for a nice drink, a draft of cold water or lemonade or whatever it is, then that exists simply because you've got the need. And if you have a yearning for eternity, for a yearning for immortality, the correlation is that there is a life after death. There is that need that's met. God has designed us in such a way. In fact, in Ecclesiastes 3:11, it says he's placed eternity in our hearts. So every single human, you could be a stark, raving atheist who denies everything divine, but they have in them a sense of foreverness, a yearning for immortality, a yearning for purposefulness and longevity and to perpetuate your life after your life is lived. So that's one thing why the vanity and vexation of spirit is just underscoring in Ecclesiastes time and time again, 38 to 39 times, is the fact is that there's a life thereafter. And so in the days of your youth, remember your creator and remember the writings of Ecclesiastes to fear God. This is the essence, and to live within the confines and the parameters of his commandments. And that's where you'll find true life. And that's one thing that characterized Jesus. Let me just quote a verse in Isaiah chapter 49. This is one of the strongest verses in the book of Isaiah about Messiah. And when you first read it, you almost think this can't be. And when I've actually quoted this publicly many, many times, and often there's a pushback. People say this can't possibly be referring to Jesus, but it is. It's one of the little vignettes, a little window into the anonymous servant of the Lord. And this is what it says, Isaiah 49, verses 4 to 6. And these are the words of the Messiah. And this is what he says. I said, I've labored in vain. I've spent my strength for nothing in vanity. Jesus lived within the experience and the reality of the book of Ecclesiastes, vanity and vexation of spirit. Jesus poured his life and his ministry for 3.5 years. And at the end, everybody's run away. Everything seems to be dissipating. He's been betrayed. And now he's before the Sanhedrin, and he's going to go off to crucifixion. And that sense of vanity is a sense that descended upon Jesus. And this is what he says, I've labored in vain. That's our word, vanity and vexation. I've spent my strength for nothing in vanity. Now, if we stop there, it would be a disaster. Isaiah doesn't stop there. But that's Jesus' experience. But this is how he responds. This is the sense of vanity that he experiences. Everything seems to be washed out. Everything seems to be coming to an end. Yet surely my right is with Yahweh, the Lord, and my recompense with my God. And now the Lord says, he who formed me from the womb to be a servant, to bring Jacob back to him, that Israel might be gathered to him. For I'm honored in the eyes of the Lord, and my God has become my strength. And he says to me, is it too light a thing that you should be my servant to raise up the tribes of Jacob? Bring back the preserved of Israel. I'll make you a light for the nations, and my salvation will reach to the ends of the earth. So that's the Lord God's response, that your ministry, although you feel the sense of vanity, you feel the sense of imposed vexation of spirit, this is what I'm going to do. And through his death, burial, resurrection, now the gospel is going to the ends of the earth. So Jesus does not give into the despair, but he feels the despair and he experiences that. That's what makes him such a perfect intercessor and faithful and kind and loving high priest, because he knows the sense of vexation and vanity and the struggles that his people go through. He's experienced them all, but he gave the program to his father, and his father says, I'm going to do big things. So just hang in there. And so he does, of course, and he enters in through the crucifixion to burial and then resurrection and the glorious ascension. So Jesus has that sense. And listen to Luke chapter 4, verse 41. Jesus answered, O faithless and twisted generation, how long am I to be with you and bear with you? Bring your son to me. It was a case of a demoniac that wasn't being healed by his apostles. And you can feel Jesus' frustration. So let's just say this. Frustration and the expression thereof is not necessarily sinful. Jesus says, how long will I bear with you and be here? Bring your son to me. And so Jesus enters into the book of Ecclesiastes. The last thing before we get into the book of Ecclesiastes, and I'm just going to go through 5 things in Ecclesiastes, 5 minutes for each, is that Jesus also was the perfect son of the Father. And when you get into the wisdom literature, the first 9 chapters of Proverbs is a father speaking to his son. It's mentioned 20 times. He mentions over and over and over again. Son, listen to my words. Son, pay attention to my instructions. And he says, son, he even talks about the Lord um, disciplines us because he loves us. That's why he disciplines us. And that's used in Hebrews chapter 12. The whole process of disciplinary action in our development of wisdom is the loving imprint of the Father's heart to his disciple. So all the way through, you have this sense that Jesus is the Son. Now, Jesus was discipled. Jesus was a disciple. You say, well, who discipled Jesus? His Father discipled Jesus. And you get that in Isaiah chapter 50. And this is an interesting quotation, Isaiah 50, that says, and this is 40, chapter 50, verses 4-5. The Lord God has given me, the Messiah, the anonymous servant of God, the tongue of those who are taught. The word taught means a learner. It's the word for disciple. The Lord God has given me the tongue of those who are taught, that I might know how to sustain with the word him who is weary. Morning by morning, he wakens me. He awakens my ear to hear as those who are taught, who are learners, who are disciples. The Lord has opened my ear, and I was not rebellious, and I turned not backward. Every single day that Jesus rolled off his little pallet, his bed was probably a pallet on the ground. Every morning, morning by morning, he listened for wisdom from his Father. Listen to the wisdom literature in Proverbs chapter 8. This is wisdom speaking as a virtuous woman. Now, O sons, listen to me. Hear instruction, be wise. Don't neglect it. Blessed is the one who listens to me, watching daily at my gate, daily waiting beside my doors. Wisdom is a daily portion of food. It's the bread of instruction. And Jesus in Isaiah chapter 40, anonymous servant of the Lord here, wakens my ear. Morning by morning, he wakens me. So Jesus always, every day, orientated to wisdom's call to hear her instruction as he was discipled by his Father. That's a beautiful vision of Jesus as the anonymous servant of the Lord in the school of wisdom. Okay, 5 lessons of Ezekiel, or Ecclesiastes rather, and then I'll be finished. 5 lessons. And these are not the only 5 lessons, but these are 5 that I chose. There's actually a lot. But number one, the lessons of Ecclesiastes. Don't attempt to extract out of life more than it can give. Don't attempt to extract out of life more than it can give. In other words, there's only so much marrow in the bones of life. One thing you'll get through Ecclesiastes is life under the sun is inadequate. Whatever you invest in and enjoy, and do enjoy life, but it will dissipate in the end in death. So don't expect to get more of life than it can give. There's only so much marrow in the bones of life. Example, Ecclesiastes 5 verse 18. Behold, what I've seen to be good and fitting is to eat and drink, find enjoyment in all your toil, which one toils under the sun, the few days that God has given to him, for this is his lot. Life is brief. Ecclesiastes 6 verse 12. For who knows what's good for man while he lives the few days of his vain life, which he passes like a shadow? Or who can tell what will be after him under the sun? Life is brief. Life can only give so much. But the other aspect of life is brief and vain and dissipates is that enjoy the good gifts of God. And here is an example. I'll give you 3 quotations from Ecclesiastes. But don't expect to get more from it than it can give. That's the important thing. Ecclesiastes 2, 24, 26. There is nothing better for a person than he should eat and drink, find enjoyment in his toil. This I saw is from the hand of God, for from him who can eat or who can have enjoyment? For to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy, but to the sinner, he's given the business of gathering and collecting, only to give to one who pleases God. Ecclesiastes 3, verses 12, 13. I perceive that there's nothing better for them, humankind, than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Also that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. That's God's gift to man. Ecclesiastes 9, 7-9. Go, eat your bread with joy, drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already approved that you do that. Let your garments be white, let oil not be lacking on your head. Enjoy life with the wife whom you love. In other words, enjoy relationships all the days of your vain life that He's given you under the sun, because that is your portion of life and your toil in which you're to toil under sun. And Ecclesiastes 11:9 and 10. Rejoice, O young man, in your youth, or young woman, young man. Let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart in the sight of your eyes, but know that God will bring you into judgment. Remove vexation from your heart and put away pain from your body, for youth and the dawn of life are vanity. So he's really making an announcement here that there are the good gifts of life, the daily sustenance of life, the food, the drink, the relationships, the work, profitable work that he gives us to do. But don't expect to get more out of it than you can give, than it can give, because we're made for eternity. We're made for another life. So enjoy life, but don't expect more of it. Now, Peter, when he was at the Transfiguration, he saw Jesus and Moses and Elijah, and he didn't know what he was saying, but he said to the Lord, let us make 3 tabernacles or 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses and Elijah. What Peter was trying to do was flash freeze the experience and institutionalize it. It's like bottling the wind, let's bottle and make this into a commodity. Peter wanted to slow everything down and make an institution and a permanent structure, or at least a structure, semi-permanent, maybe a tent's not permanent, but he wanted to institutionalize the Transfiguration event. He wanted to stop it and make an abiding place for Moses, Elijah, and Jesus. And Jesus would have none of it. The Father would have none of it. Listen to him, Jesus, one and only. And but that's the tendency, is to try and extract more from life than we can get. So enjoy life. You need vacations. We need sustenance of body. We do need food and drink. We do need sometimes restaurant experiences. Sometimes we need a little bit of travel, but don't expect to get more out of it than it can give. In other words, don't try and make it a permanent fixture. To live permanently in Tahiti, Fiji, or Hawaii, you won't find at the end of the days that it actually satisfies. Enjoy it for what it is, but don't hang on to it and institutionalize it like Peter did on the Mount of Transfiguration. That's lesson 1. Lesson number 2, which is related to lesson number 1, accept the flow of seasons, prizing each season of life, but allowing each to elapse and pass in its allotted course. This is another thing that wisdom talks about, is that Ecclesiastes 3, for everything there's a season and a time for every matter under heaven. Time to be born, time to die, time to plant, time to pluck up, and on and on. There's 14 actually times or seasons that are elaborated in Ecclesiastes chapter 3. There's a season for each. And when we finally get to verse 11, it says, he's made everything beautiful in his time. Now, this is unusual because, okay, I'm getting old. Some of us are older. Some of us are less so. Some of us are getting creaky and decrepit, and the roof line is sagging. The eyes are dimming, and I don't hear the bird songs anymore. And I'm starting to get tottery, and I'm afraid of falling. It says in Ecclesiastes chapter 12, you're afraid and terrorized of heights because you're going to fall and stumble and break a hip. And so, but it's interesting that every time of life, no matter what it is and what season, right from the earliest developmental times when you're born, all the way through teenage, adolescence, and old age, everything is beautiful in its time. So prize it, but don't try and can it, freeze it, and stop it, because we need to elapse. And so this is the good thing for the young man, or the young man, is to remember your Creator in the days of your youth. You're going to get old, so make sure you invest in life properly, and don't try and freeze a phase and stay there. The middle life crisis is kind of this thing where you get an old man with a hairy white chest, and he's got the big gold medallion with an eagle or something, and he's run away with the secretary because he wants to revive, some kind of romance, and he's just ruining his life in an adulterous affair. That's part of what happens in life when a person tries to freeze or go back to a phase that you've already left. So one of the lessons of Ecclesiastes is prize, enjoy, Be thankful for every season of life, but learn to close the door and open the door to new chapters in your life. That's Ecclesiastes. And lesson number 3. Oh, I should make another thing. Lesson number 3. Know the imposed limits on your wisdom and stay within them. It sounds like a drinking and driving commercial. Know your limits and stay within them. Don't play the philosopher, but play the role of the dependent child. That's rule number 3. And Ecclesiastes, I've got 1, 2, 3. I got 10 verses. I'm going to read some of them. But it says that God has imposed in our life limitations to wisdom, limitations to knowledge and foresight, limitations to analyzing and understanding the past and predicting the future. And this is what Ecclesiastes said. He's made everything beautiful in his time, verses 11 of chapter 3. He's put eternity into our hearts, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from beginning to end. So he gives us the category or the concept of eternity and foreverness, but not the content. Ecclesiastes 7, or Ecclesiastes, let me read 8. When I applied my heart to know wisdom and to see the business that's done on earth, try and understand history, how neither day nor night do one's eyes see sleep, then I saw all the work of God that man cannot find out the work that's done under the sun. However much man may toil in seeking, this is a lesson for the philosophers, he will not find it out. Even though a wise man claims to know, he cannot find it out. You talk about that. Wow. Ecclesiastes 9, verse 12. For man does not know his time, like a fish that's taken in an evil net, and like birds caught in a snare, so the children of man are snared in an evil time, and it suddenly falls upon them. Man does not know you don't know what time you're slotted for. There was Daniel when his 3 friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, all 4 of them were subject and victims of the invasion of Babylonia, Nebuchadnezzar, and they're all taken off as captives to the court of Nebuchadnezzar. They had no idea. These were pious, godly men in Israel. Daniel and his 3 friends, what happened to them? Captured in a net, dragged off to Babylon, where they lived the rest of their life, as far as we know. And so we don't know. We don't know the future. Ecclesiastes 11. Or Ecclesiastes 11, verse 2, sorry. Give a portion to 7, even to 8, for you know not what disaster may happen on earth. We don't know what disasters may happen. An invasion, an earthquake, a tornado, a hurricane, pandemic, whatever. Ecclesiastes 11, verse 5 and 6. As you do not know the way the spirit comes to the bones in the womb of a woman. That's a beautiful passage. The integration of the spiritual aspect of our being with the physical aspect of our being. Integration of spirit made in God's image, the spirit part of us, integrated with the bones, the physical part of our life. You don't know how it happens. And it says, you don't know that. So you don't know the work of God, who made everything. In the morning sow your seed, and at evening withhold not your hand. For you don't know what will prosper, this or that, whether both alike will be good. So there's that area of predictive future that we just don't know. And so be very careful, as we would say, as Koheleth, that's the preacher, would say, don't impose limits on your do impose limits on your wisdom and stay within them. Don't play the philosopher, play the child. In Matthew chapter 18, Jesus said, you're going to enter into the kingdom of heaven as a child. And greatness in the kingdom of heaven is as a child. Notice he says, entrance into is childlike humility and dependence. And greatness, once you're on the road, you enter through the small gate, the narrow gate, and once you get in, you find that the pathway is defined by the entrance. The entrance is narrow and small, and the way is narrow. In other words, you enter in as a child, and you continue as a child in childlike dependence. Matthew chapter 18. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus, saying, who's greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And calling to him a child, he put him in the midst of them. He says, truly I say to you, unless you turn and become like children, you'll never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever humbles himself like this child is greatest in the kingdom of heaven. So he's saying two things. Entrance into is childlike dependency and trust. Greatness therein is through childlike dependency and trust. Stay as a child. And when you get in John, 1 John, he mentions, I think, 6 times, you'll find that John characterizes the disciples as children. He says it over and over again. And he says, dear children, and now little children, abide in him. 1 John 2:28. And now little children, abide in him. So we might have confidence and not shrink from him, shaming at his coming. 1 John 5:21. Little children, keep yourself from idols. So 6 times in John's gospel, he calls the disciples children, little children, dear children. Stay as a child. Don't be a philosopher. That's what got Job and his 3 friends in the problem. They were philosophizing about Job's predicament. And they were all wrong. They got all the wrong questions. They're asking question after question after question. And they got all the wrong questions, and they reached the wrong conclusions. They were philosophizing. God treated Job and his 3 friends as children, not as philosophers. So know your limits and stay within, which comes to number 4. I'll be quick with number 4. Don't be over wise. Don't be overconfident in your own assessment. Now, this is really interesting. It's an interesting verse, and I'm going to quote Ecclesiastes. But the lesson is, don't be overwise or overconfident in your own assessment by being a wise person. You're supposed to be wise, but don't think that you're wiser than you really are. It says, do not be, this is Ecclesiastes 7, verses 16 to 18. Do not be overly righteous and don't make yourself too wise. Why should you destroy yourself? Do not be overly righteous and don't make yourself too wise. Why should you destroy yourself? Now, at first glance, it sounds, what is he talking about? You're supposed to be righteous through and through. He doesn't mean that, because in the very next chapter, chapter 8, he talks about though a sinner does evil 100 times and prolongs his life, yet I know it will be well with those who fear God, because they fear before him. It will not be well with the wicked, neither will he prolong his days like a shadow, because he does not fear before God. So in chapter 8, he's giving the non-compromising absolute that the righteous need to be righteous. This is not moral laxity or moral compromise when he says don't be overly righteous. What I think he's dealing with, and a number of commentators have affirmed this idea, is that don't be overly confident in your assessment of your wisdom. Don't be overly confident in your assessment. Don't be overly wise in your assess. When Paul was in Corinth, for example, he was judged by the Corinthians time and time and time again. They were making judgments on him. And Paul said in 1 Corinthians 4, I don't even judge myself. And he says, the Lord will bring to light my hidden motives of my heart. You Corinthians said, Paul, he's strong and powerful in his letters, but in his personal presence, he's weak. He's actually a coward. He won't even come to Corinth, And they were making judgments about him. And so this is an interesting insight, is that don't be full of moral indignation necessarily, because your moral indignation might be misapplied or overextended. And this is what can happen to Christians. And we see that a lot with demonstrations and shouting and anger and boiling over and rallies. It is right to protect the unborn and things like that. But you get certain aspects where you get misapplication of moral indignation, and it gets nasty and it gets rude and it gets violent. And that's what I think Ecclesiastes is saying, is be very careful, because sometimes a person's sense of virtue and righteousness might be the vehicle of sin itself, through moral pride, that you know it all. And you make assessments and judgments of people about what they're doing and what they're not doing, and what they should do, what they should not do. And this is what Ecclesiastes says, be careful about judgments. And we know that if you go through the book of Acts and through the New Testament, you'll find that this happens all the time. And that's a dangerous thing, is to recognize there's so much outside of our viewpoint, life under the sun, for God alone knows the heart. And so we must be careful about that. Last one. This is number 5, insight number 5 from the preacher. Not the preacher, me, but preacher, Koheleth, which is the name of the preacher in the Hebrew, Koheleth. Don't let one's lack of predictive power, not knowing the future outcome, lead to inaction or passivity with your life. Be bold, be joyful, be godly. Those are three things. And I'm borrowing from Derek Kidder here on this one. Be bold, be joyful, and be godly. Don't let your lack of power of prediction, your lack of power of prediction, lead to sitting on your hands and doing nothing. And this is why Ecclesiastes in the last 11, chapter 11 and chapter 12, ends on those three notes. Be bold, be a man or woman of action. Be joyful, and above all, be godly. Ecclesiastes, be bold, Ecclesiastes 11. Cast your bread upon the waters. Now, literally in the Hebrew, it's send your bread upon the waters. It's probably speaking of grain export. Paul's shipwreck in Acts chapter 27 was a ship on grain export. It was full of grain. That's why they cast the grain out to lighten the load. Invest in life. Invest your life. Send your bread upon the waters, for you'll find it after many days. In other words, be active. I'm not talking about monetary investment in a business, but invest your life in things that count and don't be passive. Number two, be generous. Give a portion to 7. This is Ecclesiastes 11. Cast your bread, send your bread upon the waters. You'll find it after many days. In other words, invest in life. Number 2, be generous. Give a portion to 7, even to 8, for you know not what disaster may happen on earth. If the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves on the earth. If a tree falls to the south or the north, the place where the tree falls, that's where it will lie. He who observes the wind will not sow, and he who regards the clouds will not reap. As you don't know the way of the spirit that comes to the womb, the bones in the womb, so you don't know the work of God, who makes everything. In the morning, sow your seed. At evening, withhold not your hand from sowing. You do not know which will prosper, this or that, or whether both alike will be good. In other words, you're the businessman, you're the farmer. You're always looking at the wind. You're always looking at the temperature, saying it's not the right time. It's not the right time. It's not the right time, and you do nothing. That's what he's talking about. So cast your bread upon the waters. Invest. And he says, be generous. Give portions to 7, even 8. Even the unwise steward, when he was losing his job, he got busy, and the Lord commended him for his wisdom. He did something about it, So invest your life and be generous in your life. Give portions to 7 and 8. If a disaster comes, you've supported 7 or 8 people, and they're in provisions ready for the disaster. And stop looking at the rain or the wind or the clouds. I mean, it's not that you can't be a meteorologist and look at the weather network, but get active and do something. So be bold and a person of action. The man who wasn't a person of action in Matthew chapter 24, 25 was the person who buried the talent and did nothing. And he was the fool. So be active. Number 2, be joyful. I'm finishing with these last 2. Be bold, be joyful. Ecclesiastes 11, same chapter. Light is sweet, and it's pleasant for the eyes to see the sun. This is why I like summertime, because it says light is sweet, and it's pleasant to see the sun. Enjoy the good weather when it's there. So if a person lives many lives, let him rejoice in them. But remember, days of darkness will be many. In other words, there's the idiosyncrasies of life and the dangers of life. Rejoice, O young man, in your youth. Let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. And so he's going back again to the fact that God gives gifts during our time of vanity and vexation. He gives us gifts in joy. Be a person of enjoyment. Don't be the Christian that's always gloomy, a puddleglum, an Eeyore in Winnie the Pooh. Don't be the puddleglum. Be full of joy with even the small little gifts that God gives us. Be joyful. And finally, be godly. In this passing world under the sun, where everything will dissipate into death, look up and look ahead. Life is passing, life is short. And this is why it says in Ecclesiastes 12, remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near, in which you will say, I have no pleasure in them. When the sun, the moon, and the starlight grow dim, and you're getting old and you can't see very well anymore. And he describes old age as a metaphor of a dilapidated house. In other words, invest your life, remember life is brief, and look forward to the life thereafter. It says this finally, Ecclesiastes 12, 13, 14. The end of the matter, after all has been heard, fear God, keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man, the whole essence of humanity. For God will bring every deed into judgment, every secret thing, whether good or bad, good or evil. In 1 Corinthians 5, when Paul talks about the judgment seat of Christ, he says there'll be an assessment of things bad and things good. Now, often when we think of judgment, we tend to think of negativity all the time. I'm going to be disappointed. I'm going to lose. I'm just so full of failures, you know. But that's not what he's saying here. Judgment is God will assess everything, whether good or bad. Every idle word, every choice morsel of gossip digested will be assessed. But he'll also assess this. Every cold cup of water given in his name, God will assess and judge and reward. Every sparrow that falls, God knows the hurts and wounds. Every ruinous sinner, bedraggled, shamed, publicly, domestically, in the neighborhood, comes back to the prodigal. The prodigal comes back to the Father's house, will be embraced and celebrated. God will judge it all. And so, whether commendation or whether loss, God will judge. So, fear God. And Paul finally ends up, 1 Corinthians 15, verse 58. Therefore, my beloved brothers and sisters, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not in vain. He ends on Ecclesiastes. Your labor is not in vain. And so the Lord bless us in these contemplations. Let me just close in prayer. Father, we thank you that labor in the Lord is not in vain. We thank you that everything is assessed. We thank you that you are so good and so wise. And Ecclesiastes talks about remember our Creator in the days of our youth, and also to remember the words of delight and instruction are goads to stimulate us to action, not passivity, but to action. And their nails are dependable. And they're given, it says, by one shepherd. So we thank you that all the way through Ecclesiastes, we hear the voice of the shepherd guiding us to good counsel, wise counsel, is to invest in the hereafter, the life to come, as we live a life under the sun with the vanity and vexation. We thank we have the hope of the resurrection and the beauty of the world to come. And we thank you that it's a forever world, and you've put eternity in our hearts, and it resonates in our heart that we're made for eternity. So help us, we do pray, to live for eternity as we commit ourselves to you in Jesus' precious name. Amen.